much for sending those out. Hopefully everyone got a chance to review them. I thought this was your best set of minutes yet.
Oh, okay.
Like
this
totally
one was
nailed
down
it. Like got the right amount of detail, but it was succinct. Like I thought the minutes were great. I don't know if anyone else saw anything that needed to be shifted.
John Kelly.
Well, John Kelly's name is spelled incorrectly in the very beginning.
Damn it.
So I'll fix that before I
Hey.
send it to Amy.
Spell it Kellie, we'll be all set, you know?
So is that the only change? And does anyone else have any other pieces that they caught they want to?
No.
Okay.
I'll make a motion. To approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. All right. So updates on FY22 projects. So I have to say, I'm just super excited because when you think about where we were last cycle, we've just moved so much more efficiently this time around. So like we're able to hear the presentations, move through, 2 rounds of funding, keep it pretty crisp. And we've been able to move things through city council pretty quickly, even despite sort of kind of this added piece, right? Which is that in the past, I think we had one project, the MIFA project, that went to finance, but this time around, I think city council has just settled more into a pattern of like, let's just follow that process of every time something comes forward, unless there's sort of a really specific time constraint and a lot of details and no concerns about a project, they're going to try to follow that process, which is we submit it to them as an order through Israel Rivera, our rep, and they take it up, they move it to the subcommittee, which in this case for us is finance. They consider it. I've been attending those meetings whenever we have an agenda item on it. So I've been attending the finance subcommittee, and the chair will call on me to present the projects or to give any information, answer any questions, and they have to vote. Right. So I think everyone in this room understands, but also for anyone in the public who's watching this later, we have to make funding recommendations. We then are recommending that to city council, and city council ultimately has the power to vote to either approve that recommendation, approve, but decrease the amount of funding, or to reject the funding request. So in this case, we've now seen both rounds go through the process. Their first round went to city council and then to finance and then back to city council. And finance had said, yes, we're passing this forward to the full city council with recommendation for the Gloutak Trail Development Project, the Anniversary Hill Scotts Tower Phase 2 project, and the City Hall stained glass windows and the Lady Liberty statue, all of that, and the Wistariahurst exterior repairs and painting. All of that was the first round, right? And all of them were city projects, which also makes it a lot easier, right? So all of those were passed to finance, were recommended for funding to city council, and city council then voted to approve them. So all of those now have gone to contract development, and those contracts are now largely executed. The second round was the Miracle League Playground and Girls Inc. And so what happened with those 2 projects is went to city council, it was referred to finance. In the finance subcommittee, there was some concern about the Girls Inc. project, largely, and in fact, entirely the same arguments we talked about here, right? Ones that came from the letters that we write into the record, right? Those similar points were named around concerns about it coming off the tax rolls, of it being a nonprofit, and particularly that connection, right? Of it kind of, coming off the tax roll because a nonprofit's taken this building on. And so what ended up happening in the finance committee subcommittee meeting is that for the first time ever, it's never happened, they did not recommend funding for a project that we had recommended to the full city council. So the order from finance was here's our recommendation for the Miracle League Playground, but we do not recommend funding for the Girls Inc. project. So we followed up with Suzanne Parker, the director of Girls Inc. and the applicant in this case, and informed her and said, you have the capacity to go to the city council as a member of the public with other folks who are families from Girls Inc. if you want to present your case, right? City Council can choose to either accept or ignore this recommendation from finance. So a number of families did come in and in public comment shared their support of the project. A number of city councilors voiced their support of it. And ultimately, although the concerns were raised and I think, deliberated with, all the due diligence the city council is supposed to go through, ultimately the vote was one person against voting in support of recommendation for funding and the rest of the council voting for. So the project also was passed. So all of our projects that we recommended have now been approved by the city council, which is great. Right. And I'm glad that a lot of folks spoke glowingly about the work of our committee and said they've done their due diligence. Right. The piece with Girls Inc. That came out of it was a little unique. They voted for, approval of funding for the project for Girls Inc. As long as the city solicitor had agreed that the project was eligible. So it was a little funky. So one of the counselors raised a concern that the project was not eligible for the scope of work. It's very similar to a number of projects that we know are eligible, right? That we've approved through the CPA state coalition, right? We have no doubt in our minds that this project was eligible. Amy Lindau, that's her job as our staffer, is to do that research, make sure projects are eligible before they come to us, right? Applicants only develop a full application if they've been found eligible. So, however, the funding is contingent on this being approved through city council specifically. So I met with Kathy Degnan, the assistant city solicitor, and we had a conversation about the project. I gave her all, access to all the documents from the application, their budget, everything that she would need to consider. And she is going to give her opinion at the April 19th city council meeting. I feel very confident. It's very, for example, it's very similar to other projects like the War Memorial cleaning of the facade. I think the concern was the language in the legislation that says that it cannot be used for ongoing maintenance. But where, for example, the cleaning of the War Memorial building is not maintenance in the sense that it has, no contribution to the building. It doesn't just make it look nice. It's necessary for its continued function, right? And that thus is tied to preservation. So that's the concern here too, was kind of the work on the masonry may be considered maintenance and would not be considered preservation. But our read on that when I spoke with Amy is that it very much is eligible. It's very similar to other projects in the past that we've done for masonry. And we don't have concerns, but it is going to be run, through all the appropriate channels. It will go through city council. And as long as the city council's report says, yes, the project is eligible, then the funding will go through. Any questions about that? Because I know it's pretty complicated.
Well, as always, the wheels of government grind slowly.
Yes. Yep. Israel, Rivera, do you want to add anything from the city council perspective?
So give me a second. Man, I'm doing two things at once. Multitasking. Can you hear me? So I'm in that building.
I was seeing you before, but it's a little glitchy.
How about? Oh. Yeah.
If you want to type into the chat, I could read it out loud. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Israel. It's just too laggy. You can always type into the chat later if you want to, and we can feed it out. We can read it out.
I did. Yeah, I typed in the chat. I
He
typed it in
said
the
no
chat.
report.
Okay. All right, so we'll go from there, right? The next piece is the contract development updates. Michael, do you want to share the update from the contract subcommittee?
Madam Chairman, yes, John and I and yourself as the chair met and talked about the Gloutak and Lady Liberty contracts. And as you pointed out correctly, we're getting better at this. And this contract subcommittee meeting was a lot smoother than our first one because of the fact of the amendments we've made and the processes, as you pointed out, we've put into place. So really the subcommittee, well, John, your opinion certainly, the subcommittee, we had very little work to do. We reviewed it. It was fine. The adjustments we made since the last meeting were right in there, and it smooth, and it went through smoothly. It was really, it was hopeful that the worst is behind us, and we can now go through subcommittees and regular committee work a lot smoother. But to tell my fellow committee members, the contract subcommittee, we reviewed it. We found really nothing of any substance, and we voted to pass it on our approval to through the chairman to the committee for the contracts. It was well written. The terms and conditions were fine, and we're getting better at it. I mean, things are looking up. So no, my fellow committee members through the chair, both contracts were fine. We didn't find anything wrong.
Yep. So I think that the nice thing is now that we're using a really set template for the contract terms, and as a committee, we've approved this idea that we're going to use the same boilerplate terms for every project, other than very specific things like, well, this project doesn't need signage because it already has signage. Suddenly that makes it a lot simpler, right? And that feels really good. So at this point, I'm thinking this for Amy, who is, I mean, I know I name it here, but in terms of chair, I will say like a huge lion's share of the work. And I usually am working behind the scenes for the committee, like 3 to 5 hours a week. A lot of it is contracts, right? And when I took over as chair, we had projects that had been approved 8 months ago that we hadn't written a single contract because we were so log jammed with the legal department having a lot of turnover and always being perpetually understaffed. So the fact that Amy has stepped up to write these contracts is huge. And I know that she's done a lot more hours than she has in the past as a result, because she's taken on a task that she didn't used to have. It used to be the legal department that did this. So it's huge that she's taken it on. You have nothing but my gratitude, Amy, because you're doing a great job writing it on top of that.
I just thought to add that, Megan. I think that, it was a very smooth meeting for us, but a lot of credit does go to Amy for the work she's done and really getting the stuff to us and in really great form. So we had very few, really changes or thoughts or edits. And I think, like everything else, the more and more we do of these, it get a lot easier. But it was very smooth. We did a very quick meeting, actually.
I like doing it on Google Docs because we're able to draft it, and then the applicant, along with us, everyone can put in questions. Everyone can respond to each other's questions. And so the process can go really quickly and pretty efficiently. And then when we meet, it's just, are there any outstanding pieces that we have to resolve, going over contract terms, et cetera. Israel, I saw your hand up.
Uh-oh.
Oh no. He disappeared.
I think he was just applauding, though. It was the applauding hand.
I know that he's multitasking between this and another meeting, so that could be.
Oh,
Okay, yes, that might be it. Okay, so and the other piece is that we're using Sign Now, which is the electronic signing program that Amy researched and purchased for us. So that has been great because as soon as something's ready to go, you just email it and people can quickly scan, electronically sign, and then it goes, miraculously, it seems, to the next person. You have a contract signed in like 24, 48 hours, which is way faster than what was happening in the past, where you had to have the city solicitor office call people one by one to come into the office to sign. Okay, so that feels really good. At this point, we have drafts of every contract so far, which is awesome. Amy is working on cranking these out. Like, we're set, as long as this Girls Inc. project goes through City Council in the 19th meeting, we're set to be totally done with fully executed contracts by our May meeting, which is a record for sure. Because our previous record was like, so for the next agenda item gets into my next point, which is an update on contract extensions for past projects. So we have one outstanding contract from the last cycle still that has not been drafted and signed. And we're going to talk about that later on when we get to the NEFA project in the agenda. But we also had a series of projects, those 5 that were given extensions by City Council, and Amy had to draft an addendum for each one of those and then submit it through the sign now process again. So everyone had to sign off on the amendment. Amy, at this point, are all of those, I know you've drafted and sent all of them, have all of them been fully executed?
Okay, so you're talking about the 2-year amendments, because I was all set
Yes.
to share about where we are with all the contracts, but I do have that noted as well. But if you want me to jump to but first of all, thank you very much for your appreciation, and it means a lot to hear that. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, if
okay,
we could talk about the extensions and then the other contracts, that would be
okay,
great.
yeah. So the 2-year amendments that we have successfully executed, the Chestnut Street, which is actually a second amendment. They had a first one. This is a second one. If you remember, this was $50,000 that went to historic 348 Chestnut Street and 337 Chestnut Street housing, another $50,000. So 100,000 total. So that's been executed. So they have more time, which is really important for them, the 2-year amendment. And then Pulaski Park study, they might not have needed it, but we did decide to go ahead and also ask for that. And so that's been executed, the 2-year amendment, as well as Mayor Field improvements for the, so the Pulaski Park study was for 40,000, just to remind you. And the Mayor Field improvements was for 210,000.
And the playground equipment has been ordered and is set to be delivered within the next few weeks, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and also the amendment that's awaiting signature is the War Memorial Facade amendment right now.
We've run into some issues just with, there's different generations of folks, right, in terms of their comfort with electronic tools, even just with email. So we're going to work on how to help the folks on the War Memorial Commission to feel good about getting that amendment done. And then also needing to sign their new contract this cycle from the Lady Liberty project. Amy, do you want to give an update on any other contracts?
Yeah, so I probably mentioned this at a past meeting, but the just to start off, the fire truck contract was executed. That was an FY20 project for $130.67, just as a reminder, and the Scott Tower from FY21 for $175,000. That was also executed, and I think I noted that probably in a previous meeting. But most recently, the FY22 contracts, which are the newest ones that you all that were all approved by City Council, the Wistariahurst exterior repainting has been executed. That's for $125,000, and the Gloutak Woods Trail Improvements Agreement has been executed for $47,000. And then right now, there are a few that are almost going to be, about to be executed, or I mean, they're in progress. So of the FY22. So one is the City Hall stained glass, which I think is now with the city solicitor, because I think, Meg, you just signed that electronically. So that's for the 80,000. I think this is the phase 4 of this stained glass ongoing project. And then the Anniversary Hill phase 2 project for $30,000. is also with Lisa Ball. So it's that those, it really just goes to Lisa Ball, the acting city solicitor, and then the mayor, and then it's executed pretty much because it comes back to me. I just put in the date, and then everybody should be able to get their copy automatically. Another one that is as Meg mentioned, again with the related to the war memorial, we're waiting for Robert McKay, who of the to sign electronically the FY22 Lady Liberty Restoration. But that one, I think I just put that one in because I thought that I had done it because I had drafted it, but I didn't. But it turns out it wasn't yet circulated. So that's for 75,000. If you remember, it was originally 60,000, and then Mike Falsetti came back and said 15,000 more would be needed, and then that was approved. So we were holding off on doing that until we had the full amount. So that could be why I didn't draft that sooner, but that's all that's been drafted and just needs to be signed. And the ones that are the only new contracts that I'm working on now are the newest ones, the Miracle League Playground, working with Carrie Parsons on that, on the language and, making sure we have everything right. That's the $350,000. And then the
one, can we pause there for just a second?
Okay.
Unless were you going to talk about the prevailing wage piece and the scope of work?
I wasn't going to go into that much detail, but I can say that we do have now the scope of work language, but it was very specific. So I suggested she just make sure that, because it might be better to make, if anything is a little iffy, it might be better to make it slightly broader so we don't have to go back and do amendments. So she's going to get back to me in a week on that. And then, in terms of the prevailing wage, we believe that I think that she did say, yes, that they do understand that prevailing wages will be needed for the installation of the poured in place rubber, because the rest of it goes towards purchasing equipment, not towards installation. And for purchasing, you don't need, prevailing wages.
So what's the name of do you remember the name of the landscaping company that's come through? Is it Mountain View?
It also has the name Miracle in it, but I don't know it offhand.
I think it's Mountain View Landscaping came forward and said they would be willing to handle the installation, because that means that as a gift to the city, it does not fall underneath prevailing wage law. So it makes the project much more cost effective and tightens up the gap that they have in terms of what we gave them and what they already have and what they still need. So that's amazing. Right. And kudos to them for stepping up and saying, like, we're going to do our part for the community. I think it's amazing. And so as a result, the scope of work is just shifting a little bit, right? So that it's naming that they're doing the installation is only of the poured in place concrete and not of the entire structure. So that's great.
Okay, I missed that. I thought it was the same ones that were in the quote, but maybe that was in one of the emails.
Amy, can you just pause right there and then we'll come back for your last comment? I just see John Kelly's hand up.
Okay.
No, I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, wasn't you? Oh, was it Michael?
I think Michael did.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, just I'm kind of stunned. Mountain View, did they indicate that they were going to donate their labor, if I understood you correctly, to bore the rubber particle installation?
No, CPA funding would be used to pay for the installation of the poured in place concrete or rubber flooring. And then Mountain View would be coming in to donate their labor to actually install the actual playground structure on top of it.
Wow,
That's
beautiful.
huge.
No, thank you.
It's huge and really awesome. So just want to name, them for doing that.
Yes,
So,
I guess
may I ask, are you sure that's the exact name, Megan? Because I'm putting it in the minutes and we're here telling everyone about it. We just want to make sure we've got the right name.
Yeah, I will quickly double check. I'm almost positive, but let me double check. Amy, I know you wanted to keep going. I'll look in my email really quickly while you.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll keep going while you do that. So then with the Girls Inc., I know that we need to get that, stamp of approval from legal to city council. I'll be starting to draft that though anyway soon. So that'll be the next one, to work on. So those two. and then they'll be circulated the same way. So yeah, using the Sign Now program has like completely revolutionized this whole process. I know not with like certain people, but with most people, it's been really so much faster. It's amazing. I also want to mention, I already mentioned the 2-year amendments. And then the one thing I didn't mention is that there was the rescission. I drafted a rescission for Armor & Co., which I thought was important because that's $90,000. And we just want to make it really clear in writing that, you know, they can't come back and say, hey, you know, you need to pay this money. So since that project was canceled, we've signed off on the rescission.
Madam Chairman, I have a question for Amy, if that's through you.
Sure.
Amy, the Armor Corporation, just for my memory's sake, they chose not to go through with the $90,000 project as a result of their interpretation of the historical regulations that you have to follow. Is that correct? And thus the $90,000 goes back into the coffers.
That's right.
The Preservation Committee.
With the Historic Commission, we drafted the preservation restriction. And then I think once they had a greater understanding of what that meant, they realized that they needed to no longer take the historic placement of windows and doors into consideration as they were trying to figure out the best interior flow for this restaurant they're planning on building inside. And so they felt like they couldn't take advantage of the funding. Again, a lot of this is us getting better as a committee about how we help applicants understand this process as we better understand it ourselves. And it's the community and applicants better understanding us and what can our funding be used for and what can it not be used for. So.
No, fine. Thank you, Madam Chairman. So the $90,000 is in the process of being put into our treasury, or is it already there?
It's already there.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that it can be spent right away, since we have to go on what was approved by City Council, the budget that was approved. But yes, it does go back.
Yeah, okay. No, that's fine. All set, Madam Chairman.
Okay, so Amy, in terms of B for recent invoices, I put that on there just because I think it's interesting just to hear from you, like what projects are sort of actively like in progress and asking for money. So I don't know if you want to just briefly, it doesn't even have to be like a dollar amount, but like here are the projects that are actively submitting the invoices right now.
Yeah, so the one that's really been most active is the Habitat for Humanity, which originally came to us through the Holyoke Housing Authority, the Jackson Street homes.
Have folks driven by recently? Like drive by quick, you're gonna miss it. It's gonna be built. Like keep your eye on it. Like every time I drive by, it is like closer and closer to being completed.
Yeah, it's really looking great. And they have, the families selected and everything. One of the houses, they built a ramp because one of the people living there, has a need for a ramp, has mobility issues. So it's really great. But yeah, so they do small invoices, I guess, because so much of it is, done, I don't know, with volunteers and, it's just, there's a lot of invoices. So just so you know, we had 5 invoices so far, and there are small amounts, and there's about 31,000 left in their award. And then the other one that just came through finally was the JFK Monument, which is just under 10,000. That work was already done, but we didn't get any invoices, which really surprised me because usually, vendors want to be paid. But we finally got that from Mark Joyce. Is that his name? I think it is. Yeah. For $9,999. So the next step is the signage for that one. And then there's the Wistariahurst. We got one invoice for the electrical repair work for that. So that started, which is good. And I'm also hearing about, that from Megan a lot. And just so you know, even though I haven't gotten other invoices for new projects.
Megan Sealer, who is the Wistariahurst director.
Yeah, Megan Seiler, sorry. Even though the other ones haven't started yet, the good thing is I do have what's called purchase orders, which means that you know, they already have vendors for the Pulaski Park wall study, for example, and the fire truck and the Mayor Field. So that means, you know, that they, you know, should be starting pretty soon if we already have purchase orders with specific vendors, you know, on there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the update, Amy. Okay, so I'm gonna whip really quickly through some quick updates on past projects. Smith's Ferry Cemetery Restoration. I'm still waiting for Maureen Tisdale, Department of Recreation, Parks and Recs, to get back to me on whether or not there's money in the Parks and Rec budget to put a sign there. Did I mention this last meeting, or is this new information? Mary, if you're talking, I think you're muted.
And I don't know if
There's
Mark
nothing in the minutes in regards to a discussion about
Okay.
this.
So effectively, Smith's Ferry Cemetery is that tiny historic cemetery that's along the road as you're driving down Route 5 and you look to the right, and it's that kind of one that's like up into the hill in the woods there, like below Mount Tom, between the old park there. And it is the only historic cemetery that doesn't have a sign. And as part of their CPA contract with us, it was a very small contract. I'll have to look up the exact amount of what it was, but it was a small contract. I don't think it was $5,000 or less. And as part of that, we had said they had to have a sign. And this again was very early on when we didn't understand how expensive a sign is. They're very expensive to get a really nicely made sign with our logo, and it will last outside forever, right? So, you know, we gave them this money, and then they don't have enough money in the budget to satisfy the contract requirement of a sign. And also, there is no sign there at all. Like, nobody knows it's called Smith's Ferry Cemetery, or why it's historic or anything about it. So I worked, or thank you, Amy, it was $5,300. And so I was working with Bob Parent, you know, to help me understand what vendor he used for the sign in the City Hall ballroom. And it's the same center that this vendor that Wistariahurst is going to use to make their sign. They're now like, we have your logo ready. You're going to go back to that vendor. And I asked him for a quote for that sign. And it came in around $600. Which is way above, you know, the grant also has just, it's lapsed, right? Like the $200 that was left in the, you know, award returned into the coffers for the CPC years ago at this point. So I'm going to keep following up with Maureen Tisdale at Parks and Rec around if this is something that can be kind of owned in their budget, or if this is something that like they might come back to us for a small grants proposal just for, you know, signage. And we'll have to work on like, what's the eligibility of that, right? I know signage is one of those trickier things with CPA for like, where is it allowed? Where is it not allowed? And so it may not be allowed, right? We might need to keep kind of pushing for like, can DPW own it? Can Parks and Rec own it? Who can own the sign piece? The Chestnut Street project, it says just the next to it just says preservation restriction. Amy, do you remember what that was referring to?
Probably that we're still waiting for the MHC to review and respond to Kathy Degnan. And the last I heard from her, I think, was that she has not heard anything. But I
she
think
had reached out to them and heard nothing back.
Yeah, we should figure out how long ago that was, because I know we were given a specific amount of time that it would take. Was it 60 days?
It's been more than that to my knowledge. So yeah, I'll follow back up with Kathy Degnan around, is there a way to sort of push for like, hey, this is outside the timeline already that you said?
If it was 60 days, I don't remember. Yeah.
Okay. Mary, your hand's up.
Yeah, I have two questions now. First, why is the cemetery, you know, a historic site under the Parks and Rec?
All this stuff. So this is a bizarre piece, and I guess it's pretty normal for other municipalities, but all of our cemeteries, public ones, fall underneath the Parks and Rec department. And so I had this conversation with Maureen Tisdale too, who's stepping in, of course, as the interim director, as Terry Shepard has retired. And she also was like, huh, that's interesting. You know, and so DPW does the work in terms of maintaining the grounds, right, mowing and that sort of thing. But Parks and Rec technically is the department that's in charge of, you know, them in a more wider way in terms of like maintaining them, in terms of, you know, signage, fencing, that sort of thing. Yeah, Michael.
Madam Chairman, Mary, as far as I understand it, that cemetery has been there for quite a long time, and it was dedicated to those people that were born in Smith's Ferry, and were the only ones that are eligible to be buried there if you were born there a long time ago. And it just fell, the Historical Commission, I think just some time ago, or maybe a long time ago, just asked the city to take care of it because, you know, there's not enough people there.
Rock Valley Cemetery is also similar in that regard.
Yeah, kind of the same thing. They're historical, and many years ago, that was if you were born there, then you could be buried there. And that was, so it's historical in that sense.
Although it's interesting that the connection, you're right, has sort of been lost, right? From, you know, generations of folks who the Smith Ferry community currently is not sort of like owning, right, maintaining that in the way that, so the Friends of Holyoke Cemeteries is a group that I've supported in the past, and I've gone to their cleanup events. So they do cleanup events normally twice a year, one at Rock Valley and one at Smith Ferry, and sometimes they also help at Elmwood, right? That's the other one.
Wow.
Okay. And I will say the Rock Valley one's a little different because whenever they do a cleanup there, members of the community come who have family members who are there in that cemetery and will pitch in and do their part. And they're doing things like, you know, spritzing a special spray that they get on the gravestones to keep the, lichen from eating away at the stones, and they scrub them and rake it out and, you know, kind of do that piece. Yeah, Mary?
Okay, so then you know how we had the Miriam Miranda plaque, and that was not in this same price range, it was less, I believe. Well, I don't remember, but is it appropriate to reach out to the Historic Preservation Society and suggest that they ask for a small grant for a sign?
Oh, to reach out to the Historic Commission?
Pardon?
To reach out to the Historic Commission?
Well, whoever it is that you said is now involved. Yeah, okay, Historic Commission, then that would be all right too. But just to someone to ask them to request money for a small sign.
Right. So maybe if Parks and Rec, you know, can't come up with the money and their budget, then maybe our rep to the Historic Commission can bring it there at a future meeting. I was going to mention it in other, but maybe this is a good moment to mention this. This is Marco's last meeting.
Oh,
right.
No, I didn't think that was the case.
Okay, you get to continue until a new person's been named. I thought it was like, this is my last meeting with Marco.
No, my commission my term at the Historic Commission expires August 1st.
Okay.
So I would be there.
We have you through August.
Yeah.
Or through July.
Yeah, I was going to attend until then at least.
Okay, good. So I was not ready emotionally. You, me, and Michael are the, you know, like the original crew. Although I'm not technically the original crew, but I've been around a while. All right, John, your hand's up.
Well, I guess along that line, and I'll let the folks know, I'm the shortest termer here, but on June 30th, I will completed 20 years on the planning board. I had a very good meeting with Mayor Garcia a couple weeks ago. I informed him that I think after 20 years, it's time for me to step down. So I will be, once I leave the planning board as chair at the end of June, obviously there'll be a new planning board rep to this committee. So just let folks know that, because the word is starting to get around.
Thank you, John. I
Yeah,
appreciate that. You've been here for a short time, but I have loved you on this committee.
Well, thank you.
You're good at catching things. I appreciate that about you.
Oh, gosh. Well, as I say, 20 years is a long time on a board. So know,
Yes,
it's time.
I appreciate that.
But I'll be around until the end of June at least, you know.
Okay, good. I'll finish all the contracts before then.
Get them all done.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on, so the merry-go-round project, the update there is that their vendor, it's I don't know if it's connected to supply chain stuff or what it's connected to, or pandemic related slowdowns, but they've had a really hard time getting their horses to the vendor for two reasons. One, the vendor's been slow to be ready for them. The second piece actually is they're having a hard time figuring out how to remove what's called the standards. These are the ones that don't jump. They're literally affixed to the carousel. So they actually reached out to another historic carousel to ask them for effectively like almost a referral, like give us some advice for how have you done this in the past, because we need to make sure we're removing them in the right way so that they're going to be able to be reinstalled in the right way. So as a result, they're also considering coming to us in a future meeting and asking if they can shift the scope of work slightly to potentially being 4 jumper horses instead of 2 jumper horses and 2 standards, because they are fearing that that could slow the process down enough that they'll go then beyond, you know, the contract will go beyond even the extension capacity. Okay, Amy is saying that she thinks the contract is still good because the scope is broad enough that she thinks it can work, but they might need to make that choice, and I think that's fine. So
Same thing.
right. So, but that's where they're at in terms of just like they're hoping in the next few weeks to be able to start moving the horses to this vendor. And they're likely to come back to us and ask for an extension because of just the slowdown and being able to get them to the vendor and make sure the vendor's ready for them. Okay, the War Memorial exterior cleaning project, the update there is they now have a vendor under contract, which is great. So that's going to start moving forward in the coming months, and will be completed this spring. So that's exciting that they now have a vendor and they're moving forward. The Jackson Street Habitat for Humanity project, I think we already kind of heard those updates. And the affordable housing restriction is drafted and will just be recorded when the properties are actually recorded with the Registry of Deeds. The Wayfinders Library Commons 2 funding update piece. James Linfield is here. Do you want to give us a brief and brilliant on kind of the update of what's happening with that project?
Yep. So we had been waiting and waiting for the governor to make the announcements. The actual official announcement is tomorrow, but we had started receiving award letters before that, and so I apologize for the craziness because we got the whisper that we had been awarded before we had aired anything, and we're warned under the penalties of Guantanamo, I think, that if you can't say anything until the governor gets his day in the sun. So, but we are there, and now the easy or the fun part starts. We have just sent it out for 100% bidding. We're at 100% drawings. We're expecting 100% expecting a gap, unfortunately. That's the nature of the beast. I guess today everyone is experiencing them. All the things you were talking about earlier apply with us as well. Prices increasing, supply chain issues. Everyone's blaming everything on COVID. We now, and that probably won't stop for a while. So, but we're moving forward. We will be prepared to respond however we need to find gaps, and I'm sure I probably will be bothering someone or all of you trying to see what the city can help us with if we get there. But yeah, it's we're excited to get moving on this. So we are now. I think last time it worked out, the announcement happened before we ended up getting any of the award letters. I've have all our award letters now, and the announcement isn't happening until tomorrow. Sorry about that. But
Sure. Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee?
if anyone wants to join me, the announcements are going to be conveniently located in Gloucester. So
I have a question around how much of a gap you're considering. Like, what are you expecting?
We don't know yet. If I guesstimate it, at least 2 million is my thought is of a gap. We're experiencing 20% increases in all pricing.
Yeah.
We are taking steps. We have on our projects that are pre-funded, from in other towns and in previous awards than this. We've taken to buying materials and storing them on site, because it's not labor that's keeping up with the prices. It's materials and raw goods. We're also trying to mitigate delivery delays by purchasing early and often. Both the price, take the price that we have now, and take the product in hand. At LC1, we were very fortunate that our GC actually smelled the supply chain issues coming and pushed us to purchase. And we had a lot of materials that if we didn't have, we probably wouldn't have been able to close that project out in the fashion that we did. And it's stupid things. It's not, it can be some fastener that just holds up everything, and it's some small part that's missing. Appliances also are hard to, I'm hoping the wave of home renovations, personal, everyone during COVID had found a project, and, I think a lot of it involved in kitchens and stuff. So I'm hoping the appliances will be there, but again, and I think we would assume to do the same for this project is once we are in place, we would order and store.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we're excited about the official announcement. We're excited about the award letters. That's good. And then, just stay in contact with us. Let us know how it's going, and just give us frequent updates. And whatever that ask is that you're going to come back and ask us for.
Yeah.
Ask it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, Micro. Nice to see you.
Bye, Jim.
Now you're escaping this orbit too. You're trying to, you're running from me everywhere. Marco no longer on my other project. So
we'll look for the future one.
Yeah. Well, all right. We should talk.
All right. Bye now.
Bye now.
All right. So, I just want to, and I just share my screen really quick too. Amy, can I have share screen access?
Oh, sure. Oh, I didn't make you co-host. Hold on. Let me do that now.
I want more power. So we did in my family one of those pieces where you like everyone has to take a quiz and then share out what Harry Potter house they would be. You should do it if you haven't. It's fun. And let me tell you, no one was surprised when I was Slytherin. But me. I was like, I'm Gryffindor, people. Come on. I'm brave. I believe in goodness. They were like,
Well, who's the other guy? What's his Lutheran or whatever you're talking about?
So Harry Potter has 4 houses, right? So there's Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, and each one stands for a certain type of person. And when you get to the magical boarding school, they put on the sorting hat, and the sorting hat magically tells what kind of person you are, and then calls out what house you're going to go be in, like for the rest of your boarding school, life. So, it was eye-opening. All right, so I just want to share a screen really quickly to remind us of this piece in terms of where we're at. So we started with the tax levy and the state match. that, you know, we also included the excess from previous years. And we took that number and you take out the admin budget, you take out the small grants funding, and we had to put aside this cycle $75,999.10 to housing for this cycle that we have not expended. It just in this, you know, funding cycle alone, that money is still there until July 1. After that, it is moved into the housing budget only. So just to remind you that that was funding that from this cycle we could not spend because we didn't have a single housing project that came to us for funding. And so that funding is still there for us if we decide to, you know, honor an ask that comes to us, even this cycle from Wayfinders, to kind of support that gap, or just something that ends up being used for this or another housing project in the FY23 year. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay. All right. So the Scotts Tower land acquisition project, these were the acres that we bought north of Scotts Tower. And I'll remind folks that this was a bit messy, right? Like the developer needed to sell the land within a certain time frame. City did not yet have the funding to purchase this. And so we went with Kestrel Land Trust in a bridge loan. Right. So Kestrel technically purchased the land, holding it until this sale could go through for, you know, for the city. It's also because if you don't yet own the land, you actually, in order to acquire land, become, you can access all these grants that you cannot access otherwise. So it's also a way to make it a much more cost efficient process for the city. So rather than the city having to shell out all the funding, they're able then to leverage these state and federal grants to instead purchase the land. So that was, you know, Yoni Golgauer being really smart, right? In terms of it's from a financial perspective for the city doing that. Amy, what's the update there around, it says update on funding? It's just on like the funding sources are now coming together for to transfer to go through.
Yeah, I contacted him because I was just wondering where they were with that. And he said that right now they're watching their other additional funding on the LWCF, Land, Water Conservation Fund, I think it is, where they applied. And they have the sense, or they've been told that they will likely be approved, I think, by NPS. So they want to wait a few more weeks to see
if that National Park Service.
Yeah, National Park Service. So they want to wait a few more weeks to see if that award comes through. They submitted that grant about 14 months ago. So they will likely request—
They're your years of government, Michael.
They will likely request a 3-month extension from the CPC, which is in the contract already. It's allowed under term 5 of the contract. He says that way we can set up the sale, conservation restriction, and the final project budget approved by us this summer, but they will wait until July 1st or later to make the actual transaction, and thereby not be concerned about an end of fiscal year time crunch to submit the reimbursement requests to LWCF. But they hope that the extension request won't be necessary. So that was the last thing he said.
Okay. All right. So that brings us to our last one, which is a bit sticky. We might stick in it for a few minutes. So the only project, I mentioned this earlier, the only project from the last cycle that we do not have a contract executed for, or even drafted, is the NIFA Victory Theater Murals project. Amy, do you want me to go back?
Well, I just
wanted
to let
invoicing, you would share that there was the Wistariahurst piece, but if you want to share that now, that's great.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to make sure you knew that we skipped that one, especially for Mary, who's taking the minutes, you know.
Yeah, just that the work is now in motion, and they've started to submit invoices. Was my only piece for Wistariahurst, which I just sort of said earlier. Mary, you have a question?
Yes, in the minutes, the last meeting in regards to all things NIFA, there was a note that two departments, I think was building and health, had sent letters and were issuing fines. And so they asked us to not do anything, to just hold. So is that where we are, and what happens? Can
It's
we
bigger.
just hold?
It's so much bigger than that. So yes, there's that piece, right? So in terms of some code enforcement piece, the alleyway is a huge issue next to the Victory Theater building. And there's just some outstanding issues with the exterior of the building, with graffiti sort of not being maintained, with issues in the trash in the alleyway. Board of Health is involved because, of course, often like areas that are in our city that are not, you know, especially because it's abandoned, right? No one's there. So nobody is watching the building. Nobody is like, hey, can you move out of my alley, right? And as a result, it's being used. You know, and this is also related to the citywide issue that we're facing on addiction, right? And using drugs. So there's been a big issue with the alleyway and feeding the building, and also some concerns they have about upkeep of the building itself, right? Like the roof, and sort of like maintaining the building even as it's abandoned, or even as it's not, you know, in full capacity, right? Like I know there's been some pieces they've worked on in terms of like the demolition of the building behind, right? Like there are some pieces in motion. But as a result, the city has been pushing every year with these letters of like, we want the following things done. And there's this fine that's been accruing over time. So what they said is if this project moves forward in the contract, one of the terms for funding has to be that they have satisfied that concern, which it does not simply mean like pay 18,000 and we're good. It's more, let's develop a plan, right? For how you're gonna actively monitor the building, solve this issue with the alley, handle the graffiti, manage the roof. Like it's more, the fine is just trying to get the plan to happen, if that makes sense. It's not really about the money itself. It's the accountability or the enforcement piece, trying to get the building to be watched over and maintained. And so I think it seems it's more that let's make that plan happen, and then we would deal with that fine for whatever that number actually ends up being. Is my
So where are they?
So there's a wider issue with the project. So when Mike McManus was the head of DPW, we really approved this project based on this, like, hey, we met with Mike McManus. Yep, it's going to go in the City Hall ballroom. They had a really, crisp presentation with lots of detail, made it look like the project was ready to go. Then sort of the wheels fell off. So in the meantime, the restorer, Vita Kruta, who's Holyoker, stepped off of the project professionally, and the entire project was moved to Jeff Green, who was the person who was going to be installing them into the Victory Theater and who's the head restorer of the entire project. And when he got a hold of, then it was, the time of, we're just shifting. So it's going to take more time to get him to look at it and give us a sense of the scope of the work. It's really a new vendor. They will need to do their own assessment. Let's hold off until we have that before we draft the scope of work. Then it was, we took them out. There's 2 of them are more damaged than we had anticipated, more fragile than we had anticipated. They're painted on muslin. The muslin is breaking down on 2 of them. So there's some concerns there. Mike McManus left, and sort of Bob Parent took over the project and said, well, how are you hanging them in the City Hall ballroom? What does this look like? Like, what does it mean to install them in the City Hall ballroom? And no logistics had ever been decided, is what really came out of that. It had sort of been we're going to make it work. And there was never a plan around how they would affix it. And Bob Parent was right away like, I won't support it, right? For the pictures that I showed you at the last meeting. There's just some issues where you don't want to cover the city seal on the back of the stage in the ballroom, and you don't want to hang it from the ceiling and potentially damage the ceiling that has really intricate work up there. Then they were looking at, are there other places in the City Hall ballroom where we could affix it? And then it became this issue of like, how do you install something and then take it off and then reinstall it in the Victory Theater? And because you have 2 sections that are really fragile, they're very concerned about effectively restoring them, installing them, removing them, and reinstalling them. I think there are 14 panels in total, right? Like there's a lot of panels, right?
I
That
thought
go
there's
together.
just 2 murals. Sorry.
It's 2 murals, but it's 14 panels.
Oh.
Like there's lots of mini panels that
Oh,
come
okay.
together to make these. They're like 22 by 13 feet tall when you put them together, right, in 2 sections. But there's small panels, right, that are so fragile. They're concerned about this process of installing, reinstalling, and new restorer Jeff Green felt very strongly that they should not be installed and then installed and then removed and reinstalled, that they might be damaged. And so as a result, the idea of putting up the entire murals in a place while we wait for the Victory Theater to be restored started to feel untenable or ill-advised. And so the restorer then suggested they do something different, which is like, let's restore a piece at a time. And let's make a museum exhibit at the Wistariahurst, where one piece is sort of like rotated in at a time of the pieces that are not so fragile, right? That they can't undergo this kind of like, it would be hanging on a frame, right? It would never be physically installed on a wall. It would be hanging in a frame, right? Along with an exhibit with photographs and descriptions of like, what they looked like, how the restoration process, right? Like kind of like this entire piece. It's a totally different project. Really, right? Like it hits a point, and this was the conversation I had with centers this week, where I'm not sure at a certain point if it's the same project anymore that we put forward to city council. And so, we also don't have a policy, and I think we have to vote on one. I'm going to ask us to tonight if we can. We don't have a policy at which point, like, we don't have a deadline by which, like, if you haven't executed a contract by this date, your project lapses. It's a non-project. Didn't happen, it's not going to happen. We don't have that. That's actually what's made this so hard. So I want us to have a policy where it's like, if you from like, a year from the city council's vote, don't have a fully executed contract, that the project doesn't happen. Because without that kind of policy, it's awkward, right? And there can be reasons that sort of make sense along the way until the reasons keep happening. And suddenly it's been a year and you don't have a contract and the money's encumbered.
Are you sure that we can just develop that right here tonight? That kind of sounds like some thinking has to go into that. Planning has to go into it. What do other CPACs do? Do we have any samples?
No. I mean, Amy often meets with a group.
Stuart? Oh.
No, like a group of CPA administrators meets like once or maybe every other month. Amy, you can speak more to that. But maybe it's something she can bring there and we then consider it at the next meeting. But I want us to have a policy.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, if I can just say, I don't think it's so much that the reason we don't have an executed contract is because we never got a clear, detailed scope of work from them, or just a clear, laid out, it was always very vague from the beginning.
It kept evolving. It felt specific at first. And then
Not to me. It never felt specific to me because there were so many questions. Like he said, a temporary loan, then it was a permanent loan. And we never really heard directly from Mike McManus about all this. So yeah, it's true. A lot of things changed over time. But I mean, if we had the clarity, then I would be able to draft a contract, but there was no clarity on it. So, and like you said, it kept changing.
Amy, do you think that this is something that you could bring to the next time you meet with other CPA admin and ask, if they have a policy around unexecuted contracts or undrafted contracts?
Well,
Mary's point,
bring it to them. I'm not sure I would put it exactly that way, just because the reason is, unexecuted, like we have to draft a contract, right? So it's more that maybe I can ask them, what happens if you have an applicant who keeps changing the terms of their application after it's been approved?
I think that could be a question, but I also think, you know, it's not just about that. It's about, you know, there could be different reasons why someone doesn't have a fully executed contract, right? Okay. This is one of them, all right? But I'm sure there are other situations in which someone could somehow leave a contract unsigned, right? Or just not have a contract developed for a long period of time. And then here we are as a committee, and there's no policy for us to lean into to say like, oh, well, here's this hard and fast deadline. Like, I don't even know what the mechanism would be without that policy.
Yeah,
like, or we just vote to like, we're just going to rescind the funding. Like, we've never had to do that before. Like, I'm not even sure what that would look like. Projects in the past, applicants have withdrawn. That will not happen here.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when we had the other issue with the sconces, with that project, their lawyer just kept kind of arguing, even though they clearly, you know, were not, you know, they were in violation of the contract. So we never actually had to do a formal rescission because it was clear from consulting with a city solicitor that they hadn't, you know, followed the terms they had signed off on. There was an actual contract in that case. But yeah, I mean, I have been asking them about other things like what to do if we have an applicant who never submits invoices, because that also ties up money. If there's like a really long period, you know, that you're holding this money and yet the applicant's not taking them. And I think I forwarded that to you. So in a way, this is sort of under that umbrella.
I mean, we have contract terms where once it's executed, if you haven't completed a project with a certain period of time, the funding, right? We have a mechanism.
Yeah.
For that, at least, even if it is as long, maybe we don't want it to take X number of, you know, of time, right? But we put it in the contract as you have up to 3 years or up to whatever amount of time. And so there's a mechanism in place there. There just isn't right now if it's before a contract is executed.
Yeah.
But I talked to, you know, Don Sanders about this, and I told him I fully support the idea of the Victory Theater being restored. I'm a huge theater fan. I would love to be there watching a show. And I wish them all the best. I want the theater to be viable. I want it to happen. And I think, you know, there's just concerns about the project. He understands that. They're going to come to our May meeting and present where they're currently at. And then we're going to have to go from there. Michael?
I mean, I think they would have to put something in writing that explains every step of what the project, you know, I mean, a lot of the messages from Don have been just sort of emails and not really a more formal thing that we can refer to that says exactly what's going to happen and how it will happen in a clear sequence.
Well, unless, right, so the city, we as a committee, right, are going to have to take a vote on things like, are we going to ask them to submit a revised scope of work, right? Like a application effectively, but continue that part of the same project? Or are we going to tell them this is such a substantially different project that we're going to consider this no longer, you know, a viable project, and we're going to ask you to submit a new application next year? So I think after we hear from the applicant in May, just putting this on your radar, we're going to have that conversation and have a vote. Yeah. Okay.
Madam Chairman?
Yes. Sorry.
Where are the murals currently?
They are stored with the restorer, Jeff Green.
And do I understand you correctly, he does not have a definitive answer if both murals can be fully restored, is that correct?
He believes they can be fully restored, but he believes that there are 2 panels that are fragile enough that they would really need to be installed and restored on site.
No, that's okay. Well, is the budget, and I don't remember the amount of money we budgeted for this work, for the 2 murals. Is
We
it
gave
still?
them 100,000. The restorer is now saying it will be 200,000.
Oh. God almighty. Enough said. I hate this. This is a part of Hoyok's history. What bothers me, and I think bothers all of us, this is two iconic pieces of Hoyok history that cannot be replaced, cannot be duplicated, quite frankly. And I'm so afraid that in the midst of all this, we will lose them. I was hoping we could make a deal with Don Sanders and say, look, we'll fully fund the restoration of both murals, but they're going to be the property of the city of Hoyoke, our property. If you want to rent them for $1 a year, both $1 each a year from us to hang in the Victory Theater, fine. But I don't want to, I hate to see us get involved in a scope of work and legalese that's way beyond our capability as a committee. The thing that bothers me, I think bothers all of us most, is the murals themselves. If we were to say, look, we'll pay for their restoration, but they're going to be the property of the city of Hoyoke. You can use the 2 murals for $1, or rent them for $1 a year, for as long as the theater is there. But I'm just so, and leave the building and the legalese and the fines away from our committee, because we have no control over that. But we do have some ability to try and retrieve these murals that I'm afraid in the midst of all this are going to be forgotten.
Well, the other piece too, Michael, as I'll just remind the committee, Bob Parent is leaving in June, right? He's been the city engineer for 3 years. He's done yeoman's work, right, for our city. I mean, he's someone working 70, 80 hours a week, right? To really pull together and do good work for the city. And, you know, that transition, I think he's going to be supporting in some capacity in the transition, right? As they hire a new person. But I think it's also going to be important for us to work with whoever that new person is around how interested are they in making this project happen, right? Like at a certain point, the CPC committee and Don Sanders can't wish this project enough. We have to have a partner, right? Like we have to have someone to tango with. There has to be someone that wants these to be hung somewhere. And, you know, if Wistariahurst Museum comes forward and says, yes, we really want this to happen, here is, you know, the application. Or if the War Memorial decides they really think they could install them there, right? But we have to have a place that really wants to exhibit these, right?
That won't be a problem. I'm more worried about divorcing Madam Chair, and if I may, the rest of my committee members, I'm more worried about losing the murals in the midst of this legal and administrative battles that appear to be on the horizon. I want to make it our property, and then we'll decide where to put them, but it's going to be our property. And if I just don't want to get in a fight with lawyers. What's that?
We can bring it up to the applicant and see what they say.
Yeah,
but ultimately, right, it's their property currently, and they can decide what to do with it.
And what if they take it and go to Boston with it, and it's gone?
They can do that. And there are pieces of the Victory Theater that are actually, like we saw it in an application this year, right? We're actually now owned by other people, right? Who have like a ticket booth, right? Or
yeah, no, you're right. It is. That's what I'm worried about. To try to divorce the murals from the project itself. That's what I'm hoping we can do, so we don't lose them. But we may not be able to do that. I just want to bring that out. And the last thing, Madam Chairman, I'd like to bring up for tonight, a vote for tonight, is the Mary Moriarty amendment that says if you send us a letter, it must be in Amy's hands, so to speak, 48 hours, at least 48 hours prior to the meeting, or it will not be read or entered into the record of that night of the meeting that's 48 hours hence. But the meeting afterwards.
Yeah. Let's do that when we get to number 9.
I would just jump in, Michael, and say I would amend that to make it 2 business days before.
Sure.
Because a Friday letter is 48 hours, but it won't help us. But 2 business days will.
Good idea.
All right, I want to move. The next couple pieces are pretty quick. So update on the video project is that it's in motion. Louis Salazar has been interviewing applicants, or rather grant recipients, and did B-roll footage of the city, and of the individual spots. Thinking for the future, he also did B-roll of sites this cycle. If we choose to do more videos in the future for our like current videos, for example, or our current applicants, then we would have the before and after, right? Like before Mayersfield got redone and then after Mayersfield was redone. So he did that footage and started interviewing folks, and I've been on all the emails where he's been setting up times for interviews. So I think in the next few weeks, we're going to start seeing some rough cuts, and certainly by our May meeting, we'll be able to actually watch the videos, which I'm pretty excited about. Maybe we can do a watch party. Just saying. Okay. The historic projects workflow for FY23. I don't think I've shared this with you guys yet. Did I, Matt?
I don't think so.
Okay, let me make this larger so you can see it. Okay, does that look okay on people's screens, or should I make it larger?
It's fine.
Okay, so what Paula Ferrario is the chair of the Historic Commission, and she and I met and talked about what the workflow would look like ideally for historic projects. And there's some pieces that came up with the Girls Inc. project, for example, among others, where we just felt like the historic projects need a different timeline than the other projects. And Amy is still trying to figure out how that meshes and matches with the other projects' timelines. Like, do they all kind of shift to being a little earlier, or just historic? Amy's going to figure that out and decide what works for her. But historic applicants, really, there needs to be more time built in. And so here's our workflow that Paul and I worked out. So the eligibility application is going to be available early. It's going to be available in the summer. And then in September, this is really much earlier than they've done in the past, the applicant is going to have to complete the eligibility application by September 1. And then they're going to have to confirm eligibility with the CPC admin by September 30th. And that moves up eligibility quite significantly so that the Historic Commission can plan for an agenda in October where all of the applicants will be there at one meeting. And they can plan for it. They can put it in their flow of meetings for the course of the year. And so they'll have to attend the October 6th Historic Commission meeting to share the historic significance of the property or items in question, share the scope of work, including detailed planning documents. As says in a letter, the Historic Commission will report back to the CPC their feedback concerning the scope of work, including the property's historic significance, their recommendation on whether a preservation restriction or a PR would be required, and the likelihood of a PR's approval by Mass Historic. That sort of gives us much more information earlier on in the project versus hearing about it later or questions coming up at a later date. November, if a preservation restriction is required, the applicant attends a meeting with the chairs of the CPC and the Historic Commission and the CPC admin to name the terms of the PR, or just to make sure that they're fully understanding what a PR is, right? And what are they agreeing to, right? And then their recommendation on whether PR be required. Oh, sorry, reading the wrong line. So then they're gonna have to include the PR terms in the full application. That is still kind of being figured out, right? In terms of, is it just the terms? Is it a description of them kind of owning that they understand that a PR will be required, right? And then legal representation from both the city and the applicant are encouraged to attend this meeting. This is to ensure the applicant understands the ramifications of a PR. And I put in there, city properties are not required to hold a PR. In December, the applicant will turn in the full application by the mid-December deadline along with everybody else. So the piece that's different is eligibility moving earlier. Then they'll present their project with other historic applicants at their public meeting, January 11th, 2023. I took the advice of you all and members of the public that it made sense next year to split it into a historic night and a night for open space and rec and housing. And then February through April, we have this kind of flow of the CPC votes on funding applications and communicates suggestions for funding to the city council, which then votes to approve and decrease or reject the CPC's suggestions for funding. The CPC's contract subcommittee determines the contract terms and conditions and sends them to the full CPC for their approval. The CPC admin drafts contracts and sends them to the city solicitor for review. I think that piece we might need to amend a little bit because, you know, we've sort of been able to draft them mostly in-house and then just have them approved to form now that we've sort of hit this sort of templated understanding of how to make contracts. The legal representation of the applicant drafts a preservation restriction. This is the piece that I'm most in the air about of like, can we require this and what does that mean? Because right now what's happening is we have to wait for our city solicitor to draft them. And so this is something that we're talking with the city solicitor's office around. Like, can this happen? What would this look like? It would likely mean that someone would have to build in the costs of this into a project. So we also have to figure out like, well, how much would this cost, right? Which I think Amy can do by reaching out to other CPC admin, or you may already have a sense of this, Amy, but folks will have to build that in. Like if it's gonna cost them $4,000 to have a lawyer draft it, they're gonna have to then build that into the cost of the project. Okay, and then it has to go to Mass Historic for review. Review can take 30 to 90 days. It might take longer than that. Like, let's see how this process goes with the Chestnut Street applicant, and can involve back and forth. Applicants are allowed to bill the cost of legal work to grant application. Once Mass Historic has given their initial review and no changes are required, the PR is signed by all parties, the grant recipient and the Historic Commission, and then sent back to Mass Historic for their signature. It must be notarized. Once all parties have signed, including Mass Historic, the PR is recorded with the Register of Deeds and is then upheld by the Historic Commission for the City of Holyoke. And the May and beyond, grant recipients have to follow the processes named in their contracts to submit invoices for payment, display CPC signage, and submit official reports. Any questions or thoughts?
Wow. That's, Madam Chairman, I don't know what to say. It certainly, if I may, it certainly discourages local people that want to make Holyoke a better place from doing so when they see this. Again, we're not talking about people that are lawyers or bankers. These are average Holyoke people that want to make Holyoke a better place. And if you present that to them, they wouldn't know where to begin.
Well, this is our process now, except that we're condensing it to a much shorter period of time and sort of letting applicants swim on their own. Like we'll tell them, go to the Historic Commission. Right? They don't know how to get on the agenda. They don't know when they're supposed to do it. They don't exactly know what they're supposed to do when they get there. Right. And in general, the people who are applying for projects that would require a PR, which is a non-city project over, I mean, I've been using that rule of thumb that we've been using so far for the merry-go-round, which is like if it's over $30,000, then they would require a preservation restriction.
It's a lot to digest in one shot.
It is. And we'll keep coming back to it too, as we're figuring this out. Like I'm more trying to put on paper, like we're using this process in a very similar way now, but it's not spelled out anywhere. It's just like Amy and I taking people and like the Historic Commission taking people through the process. And it hasn't always been ideal in terms of timeline or transparency to the applicant.
Well, you're not incorrect, Madam Chairman, but I just don't want to take the spontaneity and the enthusiasm that a neighborhood group may have for a small, so to speak, small project, and then faced with this timeline and that they don't have they're not bankers and lawyers and administrators, and that the enthusiasm and the spirit of core, if you will, of getting behind a project would be extinguished, for lack of a better way to. I'm just apprehensive about that, Madam Chairman. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the piece you're naming is around outreach. And right now we're not seeing an average person come forward with an application. People who generally know what they're doing, right? They're people who are used to applying for grants, right? So like, what does that look like for outreach, right? And that's why the small grants process was made to be much more streamlined, to be made much simpler, right? Although I think we're having trouble with small grants because it's so small, there's very few projects that are really eligible. And Amy and I have been actually working on putting together a short list of like, you know, here are the things that you can ask us for under small grants. Ask us for these things in like a very simple flyer, right? That I'll show you at the next meeting. Yeah. But I think the other piece, Michael, is like if a group comes to us, like we can at least say under this current process, we can pay for your lawyer, right? Like we can help this process along, right? In terms of making sure the preservation restriction happens, versus you feeling like you have to own it entirely and you drive it and you figure it out. Marco, your hand was up.
I just wanted to say that the Historical Commission did review this issue and eventually they'll vote on it. They haven't voted yet on, you know, accepting it, but I do want to say that the other commission, Historical Commission, is reciprocating in the same way, reviewing the document and, you know, checking, and because it was still in progress, they decided to hold off until a more final version is out. And I guess I'll point out that for Armour and Company, everything was going fine, I think, until we hit the preservation restriction. And maybe it's good to get that out of the way closer to the beginning of the project so that those parameters are understood. And then people can maybe look at it and go, yeah, we don't want to do that. You know, so then, because that's what Armour did, but, you know, they met with us like, what, 3 times, doing 3 different meetings?
In total, between all of the meetings and like the reviewing the application and the drafting of the preservation restriction was like 25, 30 hours.
Yeah.
Right. That got like sunk into a project that then like when it really became clear what the PR meant, they walked away.
Yeah.
So I think I just want that to happen again.
No, good point. Good point.
Mary, you had your hand up.
Yep. So where is this document and can we read it? I mean, I heard what you said and I was reading along, but
yeah, I'm sorry. I should have sent it out.
I comprehend
when
best.
Amy sent out the minutes, I should have sent it with that, and my apologies because I thought somehow that you would access to it beforehand. So I'll make sure that that gets sent out after the meeting. So you'll have it before the next meeting.
okay, so then this thing that you just showed us, that's not written in stone. I think I heard, I mean, yeah, so that's a question actually. And then I heard Marco say that they will be voting on it. So is it written in stone? I mean, what's the deal?
No,
It's
I mean,
not firm yet, right?
It's something that, you know, the 2 chairs met, initially drafted it, shared it with the city solicitor's office. It went to the Historic Commission for conversation. It's coming here for conversation. And then, you know, any, you know, kind of outstanding issues or concerns hopefully will be resolved. And then like we shared out to both commission, you know, to both the commission and the committee for both to approve it in an upcoming meeting.
And then I think I heard you say something about it would be used as a flyer or something. So it would be
just the small grants piece is a little bit out of order. I was just naming like in terms of it being there being a sort of an outreach to like how do we get more, you know, average people feeling they know what they can ask for and like comfort asking for money for projects in the city. That I'm working on a flyer with Amy that will name a number of different projects that are eligible. So folks understand I can ask for a bench. I can ask for a trash can. I can ask for a, right? Like here's a list of the things that you can ask for that would be under $3,000 that would be eligible projects for small grants.
okay.
Because there's not a lot of public awareness that they even can ask for it or what they could ask for.
Well, that's great. But that's 2 different things then. So this document, where will that be held? Or so it will be used when anybody wants to do a historic preservation grant, then you'll run through this with them. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, right
so
now
where will
on our website for like the upcoming year, like we have to prep that so that it's ready to go. So we can put on our website, are you interested in applying? Are you in a historic project? Click here. Here's the process. If you're open space and rec, or if you're housing, click here, here's your process. So the information will be up on our website before the funding year switches over July 1. So the goal is to have this ready. So the process is clear to folks who are starting. We're already fielding email requests and calls from people who are asking already, right? For like, okay, I'm trying to understand what this CPC thing is. Walk me through the process. You know, I'm thinking of applying for next year. So like, we're already starting to field that communication. So yeah, ultimately the process would be approved by both the commission and the committee, and then would be placed online, placed on our websites. Amy, your hands up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I sort of thought of the document as more of an internal document, that this isn't necessarily what I was imagining that applicants would see. Like it could be sort of simplified on the website. But the way I'm thinking about it is, like Meg said, it's already something that applicants need to learn about. And what I tried to do with this last funding round and even before was to send them a sample preservation restriction. But I found it really wasn't enough because people were just like, but they really weren't understanding it. So I see this as like a way to educate the applicant before they get, too far in, so they really know what's involved. And also it brings the historical commission as more of, they become a partner with us, that they can really give more recommendations. Not that everything they recommend has to be approved by the committee, but it would be good to work more closely with them, so we're all on the same page.
Okay, so I will make sure this goes out to everybody and that folks can review it, and then we'll talk about it and we can hopefully vote on it in the next meeting for how we feel. If we want to approve it or if we want to send it for edits, there's time, right, to do that. I'd like to have it approved at the latest in whatever form it is approved in by June, so that we have it ready to go for the next funding cycle. Okay, the next piece is I'm sharing a document. I just put it in the chat so that you have access to a document that I've been working on. And I'll share screen as well, but I want to make sure that you have the link there. And I'll work with Amy for like, how do we access information? So I think that's a wider question. All right, so there have been some questions around, well, what CPC money has gone towards. And I think there's a couple ways we can do that. I think we have to figure out how to share it in a more simplified form. We've now been a committee for 5 years, right? We've had 4 funding cycles. So it gets a little murky. We're like, oh, what have we done? Oh, is that project? Right now we have a lot of projects. So I think we have to figure out, how are we sharing what we're doing with the wider public? And one of the ways we're going to do that is through the video project, right? I also, I'm going to talk to you later about kind of the map project that we've talked about in the past, and like the funding for making that kind of come together. Another piece is figuring out a way to really share simply with the public what we've spent funding on. So I drafted this list, which I put in the chat, so you can have that link. So you can see the projects by category at this point. So I listed all the projects along with their years and how much money. In this document, if something was expended less than what was awarded, I included that amount, right? So let's say something got, $80,000, but really came in at 71,222, right? Then I put that number in instead, because that's what was actually expended on the project. Ones that are in motion, have not been completed, are the awarded amount. And that can be shifted, right, over time as those projects are completed, to the expended amount versus the awarded amount. So that's something I'm still thinking about how to name here for what's an expended done amount versus what is an awarded amount that can change to be less money depending on what comes in from invoices. So you have the historic preservation section, and then an open space section, and then a recreation section, and then an affordable housing section, and then the total at the bottom. So far, between awarded and expended amounts, the committee has delivered funding up to $2,754,578 over these 5 years. right? And remember, it's 4 funding cycles, but that's because the first funding cycle was a double, right? The first year was the tax levy had started and the committee had been formed to start forming its body, its charter, its rules, right? Like that whole piece, its processes. But the first year it spent funding or recommended funding was its second year. And then the second piece is the totals by category. So far in historic, we've, sorry, computer's a little glitchy, kept rolling on me. We have $1,046,739, which was 38% of the total funding. Open space and rec, I broke that out in both ways and then together. So open space has been $357,150. Recreation has been $925,689 for a total of $1,282,839, which is 47% of the total. Affordable housing has been $420,000, which is 15% of the total. And then projects that were awarded funding but did not move forward, I named as the MIFA Victory Theater sconces for $100,000. Recipient did not achieve full funding within a required time period. 123 Pine Street affordable housing, $120,000. Recipient was unable to secure historic tax credits to make the project viable. 43 North Canal Street exterior restoration, $32,000. Recipient was unwilling to accept preservation restriction. Armor and Company exterior restoration, $90,000. Recipient wanted to diverge from restrictions required. And Rock Valley Cemetery obelisk, $3,000. Need for crane exceeded possible award amount under the small grants process. Okay, so I just want to open it up for a brief conversation. What are our thoughts seeing that? What are our takeaways? I will say, putting it together, I was actually surprised. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around like what you're noticing and how we've spent funding so far. And is this matching your hopes for the committee? Were you surprised about anything? Is there something you'd want, like, yeah, I'd love your thoughts because I had some. Marco?
Yeah, I was surprised that the historic category was way more than the others in number of projects and cost. And so it makes sense to split it off like you had previously shown. Maybe that, maybe all together it's like a big lump. But if you divide it up into historic and the others, it might be a little more efficient process because maybe it's easier to manage in smaller chunks.
Yeah, we have way more historic projects than we have anything else. Mm-hmm. But we also have more smaller projects coming in historic than in other places.
Good.
John?
Yeah, I guess I'm surprised that affordable housing came in so low. We had nothing this year.
Me too.
Considering the amount of affordable housing we have in Holyoke, you think there'd be some projects around it, but there don't seem to be. That could change. That could change, but right now it's kind of surprising. 15%.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is we've had projects that have come to us that we approved 123 Pine Street.
Mm-hmm.
And then that project fell apart. So the money went back. We saw, last year was an off year. We didn't have any housing applicants largely because, with the ARPA funding that came through, anyone that was ready to go with an application, they went to ARPA first, and ARPA was so generous, people got it. Right. And so then they didn't need to come to us, right? So as a result, we rolled that funding over, like I showed you earlier. So it is low. And keep in mind too, you have to spend 10% in every category. So we're only 5% above the minimum currently that we have to expend on housing. We do have a lot of affordable housing in the city. Although it's interesting, I don't know if anyone is a newspaper junkie, but I love to follow what other communities are doing in the area for CPC. And it's been interesting watching other local communities really focus on, I think a lot of people have a very distorted understanding of what affordable housing is or can be. And for example, in the Northampton CPC approved funding towards affordable housing for teens in transition who are coming from being homeless. there was another group locally that did specifically veterans housing. And we have seen some projects come through that are similar, that asked us for funding for projects that we said no to, like the Armory, which they were talking about using for veterans housing, but felt like a very big ask and felt like a big project. You know, there were other, you know, projects that came through that asked for funding, but we were kind of weighing it and sort of choosing like one, you know, affordable housing project per round. But we never chose more than one per funding cycle. And I think we very much viewed it as this, like, as a committee of like, well, we're going to pick one or the other. We're not going to pick both. Right. So maybe that is also sort of at play.
Yeah. I think it's great information for the public to see where the money's gone.
Mary, your hand's up.
Yep, that's what I was gonna say. I think it's great for the public to see that information. I really thank you for doing all that research, Megan, and for compiling that in such a, you know, an analytical way. So yeah, I hope that goes up on the website.
Yeah. Yeah, I plan to. And there was also an agenda item in this last city council meeting that sort of lent itself to the sense that we were not supporting city projects, that we were sort of like there's a spurious feeling that we were like being willy-nilly with the taxpayers' funding and just sort of like giving them to all these non-city projects that were not well deserving.
I would suggest we send a copy of that to the city councilors, because that's a great point. Put it right in front of them, you know, that they would see where this money's been spent. Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
That is a great idea.
Maribel, do you want to say anything? I don't know if you had any thoughts or takeaways just looking at it.
I'm learning. I'm still learning, you know, but I think that is a very good idea.
Okay.
Can you repeat the idea? Sorry, I missed it.
Excuse me?
The idea would be to find a way to
share
share this
with to share
the city council.
Yes.
Oh, to share with city council. Okay.
So I think I can talk to Israel Rivera around what does it look like to put an order forward? Is it a communication or presentation piece? And how do they want it delivered? And we can go from there. But I think that's a good idea. Okay. What is last? Okay, assigning representatives from the CPC to actively communicate with Fy22 applicants. One thing that we're sort of discovering is the applicants need to be asked how they're doing. Like they won't often, like there could just be like radio silence. It'll be like 6 months and they're like, how is that coming along? And then you reach out, they're like, oh yeah, we're having vendor issues. And you're like, oh, well, that would have been nice to know, right? Or whatever that piece is. So what I would like to do is to assign each of our projects this year to a specific person on the CPC. Amy's got a lot on her plate, right? And I do too, in terms of like right now, like between the two of us, we're handling all the communication to all applicants, and it can be a lot. So what I'd like to do is assign each person to a project, or each project to a person. And you know, every month, just I'll start with an email that's like to you, you know, and to them and me and Amy, and say like, hey, this person's going to be following up with you. What's the best way for them to be in contact with you? Because also some people are like, yes, email. And some people are like, I just want to answer emails. And like, we'll discover that. But maybe it'd be good to ask them up front. Are you a phone person? Is there a number I should be calling instead of emailing? Right. And like this person's going to be reaching out to you every month and saying, give me an update on your project. How's it going? Like, have you started doing work? Are you having any issues? Like, just give me an update, or just write back and tell me no update. And then at the city, you know, at the meeting, you can say, I reached out and here was the communication. Like, I think that could be really helpful. Because what we're finding is like, you do finally get a hold of someone and then like they name a thing that like, maybe you could help with, or maybe the question or whatever that piece is. So that's what I was hoping. So I know, for example, like we have Lady Liberty And I think, you know, Mike has already, thank you for all of your work on that project, has really been taking that on, right? And like doing that communication piece and like spearheading, moving it along. So I think it makes sense for Michael to stick with Lady Liberty, like to completion here in terms of getting the updates and like informing us on how it's going. For the Gloutak and Anniversary Hill project, I don't know if it makes sense for like Mary to take one and Helene to take the other. Or what that, you know, makes sense for. I don't know what you think about that, ladies.
I don't mind taking both, but it's up to Helene what she wants. But I also think it ends up that there's a lot of things. Wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute. But I think with the Miracle League, that's a huge one.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was thinking I was probably going to take on.
Okay.
So I don't mind taking both on.
Okay.
So Miracle League would be Helene. So I'm just writing this down so I can remember later. And Mary would take on Gloutak and Anniversary Hill.
Yes.
Okay, so that leaves the Wistariahurst exterior work and painting, and leaves the Miriam Miranda plaque. And I'm gonna mispronounce it again. It's not Eli. How do you pronounce that field?
Ely.
Oh my goodness. I need to start writing a phonetic like next to it to remind me. All right, so I still need someone to take on the Wistariahurst, the stained glass, and the plaque for Ely Field, the Miriam Miranda plaque, and then Girls Inc. But I'm not going to name that until it's official from City Council. What do we think?
Meg, I can do a couple of those and then hand off later on.
Okay. So
I'm in contact with Bob Parent pretty frequently through work, and if he's doing those and he's also handing off, maybe that's like something destined to be.
Okay, so maybe you could take on the stained glass and Wistariahurst.
Yeah. Okay.
And stained glass is very much Bob, and Wistariahurst is very much Meg plus Bob in terms of who's doing that work. And of course, the important part too, which you named, is like kind of helping those projects transition to Bob not being there, and like who's that new person? Are they up to date? What support do they need? Are there other eyes in the project? Are they like monitoring it? Like that piece, I think. Maribel, would you mind doing the Miriam Miranda plaque?
No problem. If I can get all the information, the contact people, yes.
Okay. Yes,
No problem.
So what I'll do in each case is I'll set that email up, and I'll include you, and Amy and the applicant and me, and then I'll send hey, this is the person who's going to be following up with you. Expect a monthly email or phone call. Let them know how you want to be contacted. And you'll be, kind of giving updates that they will then be able to share at the meetings.
Okay.
So are we waiting for your email first to kind of set the stage, and then we follow up? Okay, good.
Yep. And then I'll be clear to everybody.
Can I just ask, I know that you said that Mary said she's doing both Gloutak and Anniversary Hill, but there are two Anniversary Hill projects, there's the Scott Tower, which is kind of connected to Anniversary Hill, the acquisition, and there's the study, the design. So I don't know, is Mary, are you doing all three?
Mary,
well, I understood what Megan was talking about was this year's projects. And in fact, I was going to ask, are you going to do the same for some of the outstanding projects? And that would be where the first Scott's Tower one comes in. Or, so many of the things we talked about tonight would come in. So I understood it to be for this year's application.
Yeah, I think
is that correct?
That's where I'm at, because Amy and I are deep in the other, projects and have relationships of communication that we figured out with them. And I think it makes sense to kind of help, have us own kind of the existing current projects and then just move forward with this kind of system moving forward. Okay. the scope of City Hall renovations, I just want to quickly name that I had a conversation with the mayor earlier this week. One of the pieces that came through from that City Council order was an ask that the mayor share information with us around city projects that are upcoming. Like, are there projects that we should be expecting coming down the pipeline for specifically city properties like the City Hall and the City Hall Annex? Both of which, yeah, that there's big things coming down the pipeline, right? Like looking down, right, like the pike here, like you can see the Scotts Towers coming, right? I can. Like, we've been asked to purchase land, we've been asked for a site study, we've been asked for, right, like this is coming, right? Like it's going to be an ask, like, and I'm sure Gloutak will do his due diligence to put together as many funding sources as possible. But I have no doubt we'll be part of that pie, right, of them coming for us. Not coming for us, coming to us, and asking for a certain amount of funding to help this move forward for the Anniversary Hill Trail development and the Scotts Tower renovation. So that's definitely on our radar. And the other piece on our radar is apparently in 2014, there was a huge study that was done about all the things that need to happen at City Hall. And then it sort of languished, like nothing happened with it. So the mayor sent that to me, and I shared it with Amy, and she's starting to do her research on what pieces of it are going to be eligible versus not eligible. For example, the City Hall chamber, the council chambers have those beautiful murals that are all cracking. I don't know if anyone's been in there recently, but like it's bad, right, in terms of the issue. But of course, the scope of work that was put forward in the 2014 study was, well, we're going to take them down and recreate them on canvas. And that may not be allowable, right, to do a recreation in that way versus to restore something that exists. So there's some pieces that will need to be researched and figuring out like what is eligible. And they will have to put together an application. And whoever the new city engineer is, will have to be a part of that work, right? And be wanting to take on that work. So part of it is really going to rely too on these transitions that are happening in City Hall around the DPW and the, city engineer for like what projects come forward next year. So just want to publicly state our support for city projects. We love city projects. We spent a lot of money on city projects so far. And we're going to continue doing so, right? Like we see that as part of our responsibility to the city and our privilege to serve the community is part of that. And we're going to keep doing that for whatever applications come our way. I was actually looking back and there's not a single city request we've said no to. You said yes to everyone. So, and we can only fund projects that come to us, right? So in this case, I think that we'll be looking, in the future to continue to support the City Hall for sure. And we already have to the tune of $217,206 through the stained glass project, which we'll continue to support. And I'm sure we'll be asked to do other things too in the future for those two buildings. So yeah. So just wanted to share that. Mary?
So it'll be an interesting fine line that we'll have to walk in terms of discerning which things qualify, because it can't be maintenance of City Hall. Is that correct? It has to be only historic preservation.
Yes. Although similarly to like the point that the city councilor brought up about Girls Inc., like there's a lot of pieces where like you wouldn't consider it maintenance if you don't do that thing and the building falls down. It's not maintenance, it's preservation, right? If the exterior of the building is the stones are starting to crumble because it needs support on the exterior, which is right, then that makes sense for us to do that work, right? And we're falling underneath the eligibility of the legislation.
Is the 2014 evaluation, was it an internal evaluation or did somebody get hired?
Yep. Yeah, it's a formal study. It's very detailed in terms of just what needs to happen and how much it would cost. Now, keep in mind, right, like what we just heard at the Wayfinders project, when I asked, it was like, well, yes, but what percentage are you assuming it's higher than this? And it's like between 20 and 25%. Okay, I want to move to others just pretty quick. The first piece I want to mention is that Holyoke's sesquicentennial, right? I practiced that word so that I could say it correctly, is next year, actually in March. And that means that we are celebrating our 150th anniversary as a city being incorporated. And so there's a series of things that are gonna happen next year that are gonna be sort of put under that banner, that umbrella of events as we're celebrating our anniversary as a city. And so I just wanted to name that, right? We might see some historic preservation projects kind of come through and be celebrated underneath that banner. And, you know, keep a lookout, because there's going to be lots of interesting things coming out from OPED and from, you know, Holyoke Preservation Trust, like celebrating this over the course of the year. The graphic design work that I've mentioned in the past with the map, I'm just putting on your radar that I'm going to come to you soon to ask for money. I'd like to put out a request for proposal for a graphic designer so that we can have a professional map, so that we have a place graphically to put the videos that we have paid to create. So that when people come to our website, there's this really nice graphic representation of the city where folks will see like ping, 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 like little places where they could hit a map and then the project will come up and it'll have a really nice description with a photograph or a live video that they can watch. And this is something that we can put together in like a Google map kind of setting, but it's not going to look professional, right? Nor will it really look compelling. And so that's something that I think will likely, you know, cost between $1,000 and $2,000 to do that work. And something that would only come out of the admin budget if we have the funding to do so. So we'll see where we end the year, right? Like, let's see where we are in June. And if we still feel like it's too tight or we're not ready to talk about it or entertain the conversation, then we'll talk about it as one of our first pieces in July around like, would we want to create that map or what that would look like? What's that process? And I'm going to work with Lori Bellinger in purchasing to figure out like, what does it look like to put out a request for proposal? Because I've never done it before. And so, yeah, so that's something. I've talked to Holyoke Media to ask them, like, do you have anyone in-house that will do this kind of work that you know of that does this, that could support us without us having to pay anything? When I described the scope of the work, they were sort of like, no, you know, not something internally that we would necessarily take on and do. It would, you know, we could help you with like a Google map, like we could help you with like using it, you know, tools that currently exist. Or that was a sense that I got, you know, but that they wouldn't kind of take on that kind of graphic design work. And if there's other people in the city who will do that work, we'll certainly pursue it, right? The goal is not to spend money we don't have to spend. The goal is to have the work done and have it done so in a way that's really compelling and good. I'll tell you, and Amy will tell you, you know, like CPC is new in our city. And there's a lot of people that don't quite understand what it is. And there is always going to be like an anti-tax feeling, right? In our country, it's just part of the blood and bones of our country, right? And I think it's really important for us for transparency, as well as just like the ongoing existence of this funding source, that we are clear and transparent to the public what exactly we're doing and how it is helping the city. Amy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we do have a web designer who's been with us from the beginning, Joanne Pinatel. She's worked really hard. She does graphics. She actually created the graphics that we use on a signage, the wonderful graphic that is with a silhouette of like the child on the swing and the tree and the church. So anyway, she's even done some work for us for free when we didn't have that, you know, much money in the budget. So I just think it would be good to give her the opportunity, because we already have her on the payroll, you know, doing stuff and she also, like, nobody's aware of this, but our site was hacked at one point. I had to contact her and she immediately resolved the problem. So she might be a good person to do this work. That's all.
Yes, please. Yeah, send me the information so that I can email them.
And how do you spell her name?
I can put it in the chat for everybody to see. And you'll see it.
Could you just spell it? Because
Joanne, Joanne, Pinatel, Pinatel.
ATL.
Pinatel. Yeah.
Oh, EL. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then April 19th, we're gonna have a budget meeting. It's a lot of things that need to be resolved, right? Between past budgets, funding streams that are encumbered to certain categories, to tax, you know, like the CPC, like every year the state says it's going to be a 35% match, right? They give us a number and then we have to estimate, create a budget, but then maybe it comes in higher, right? And so then we have to reconcile multiple years of those kinds of surpluses and projects who, you know, funding has been returned and all of that piece. So Andrew McMahon is going to meet with Amy Lindau, and I think the Tanya, the tax assessor. Is that right, Amy? Might also join them.
Well, we haven't contacted her because it hasn't been clear whether Andrew wants to do that, or no one's gotten back to me on that. So,
okay.
If she, it would be, I think it would be good, but I have to give her some notice and let her know, but I haven't heard from him, so.
Okay, yeah, so that meeting is happening on the 19th. So before the next meeting, we'll have a really nice budget update, which I'm excited to do. The last piece is just the, let's vote on that policy around the letters being given to us within a certain period of time. Does someone have a motion they want to put forward?
I make a motion that all communications received at least 2 business days prior to our meeting. So it's letters, emails, anything we get as far as communication. I say 2 business days because you want to make sure it doesn't include weekends or holidays.
You got it.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion?
I just want to add that I think applicants should send it directly to the committee or to you, the chair, because it's possible, since I work part-time and work 2 jobs, I might not see that email within the 2-day period. So just wanted to mention that.
It's hard though. I don't think my email's even on the website. Like, I think it has to be your email because you're the admin and you're the only email that's a public email. Like, I don't have a city email. I have like a personal email.
Okay, well, we could always put that on there on the website if you were comfortable with it, or you could create another email. I'm just saying, I'm just worried that somebody might send it 2 days in advance. I mean, normally I would see it, but I might not because I might be working all day on my other job. And then no, but then it wouldn't be 2 days before the meeting. That's the only reason I'm mentioning it.
Then Amy, let me ask you this. How about 3 days, 3 business days?
That's probably better. Yeah.
So, I mean, just give you another, you know, so I'll amend it to say 3 business days before our scheduled meeting.
Do we get a second on the amendment?
Second.
All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, that's unanimous. All right. Is there anything else under other that anyone else wants to bring up before we close?
Next meeting, Madam Chairman, the date of the next meeting?
Thank you, Michael. Okay, the next meeting is, my computer's gotten so slow. It's going to be May 11th at 6 o'clock. All right. All right, I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the warm weather.
Yep. Have a good evening.
You
Good night.
too.
Sure.
See you guys.